Welcome to the Personal Development Essentials podcast. Today I have the pleasure of speaking with an exceptional lady. She is an international public speaker who speaks straight from the heart, and she helps people to live fearlessly with coaching, with workshops, with speeches. And she's been featured as a guest in many podcasts and radio shows around the world. So it's a real privilege to speak with you, Sue Curr, today. Welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Aggie. I'm absolutely thrilled and honoured to be here. Thank you.
It is my pleasure. And Sue, I wanted to start straight away with something that I was reading about the people that you work with and you help, and you use the term professional swans.
Absolutely.
So describe that for me, please.
Okay. Well, for me, we've all seen swans, on lakes and rivers and so on. They just glide serenely along in life. I used to be a professional swan. My background's in education and social health care. And I was a professional swan in that I sailed serenely through life, and nobody knew, except the people that were really, really close to me, husband, etc. Nobody really knew how much I was struggling, because underneath that serenity, that facade of serenity, I was paddling like crazy just to stay afloat in life, to cope with everything. So for me, a professional swan is me, essentially, some way down the line, somebody who on the surface has it all and has it all together at that, but behind the scenes, when the curtains are drawn at night and they're at home with their family, they're falling apart because they don't have enough time in the day. They don't feel as though they're good enough. They don't feel as though they're up to the job, and they will do anything and everything, including saying yes when no would be far more sensible given the circumstances. They will do anything to give the illusion to everybody else around them, oftentimes including the nearest and dearest, that actually everything's okay, everything's cool, I can cope. And actually what they're doing is sort of drowning, as opposed to gliding along the top of the lake. They're drowning in overwhelm and stress and heading for complete burnout in many cases.
So why do you think people do that? Why do you think they, rather than facing the... I know everyone has been guilty of that
Sure.
One time or another. I don't think anyone can avoid that. But why do you think that people, instead of dealing with something like this, they hide it from everyone else, and they try to just keep the appearances rather than the core of the problem?
Sure. I think oftentimes we, especially in the UK and lots, and I know it's true, certainly in America, I've got lots of friends and contacts in America, but the people that I know personally, let alone clients, tell me that it's the fact that they don't want other people to see them as failures. Mm-hmm. They don't want to be seen, for instance, if they're in corporate, they don't want to be seen as imposters. If they're a mother of 4 children, they don't want to be seen as lacking in parenting skills and things like that. So when I say professional, that term in itself doesn't necessarily indicate a professional person, somebody in the professional corporate world. Mm-hmm. Professional swan to me is somebody that can be from any walk of life, male or female, who are so insecure about their own abilities. Maybe they have a backstory that's rooted them in a fear-based living. But either way, the inner chimp, the inner mind monkey, our inner critic, has convinced them that they're not good enough, clever enough, pretty enough, all the rest of it, not enough money, etc., etc. And they don't want other people to see that actually they're not. They're not coping. And yeah, they might be pretty and they might be rich and they might be successful on the surface, but they don't want to be seen to be vulnerable. And that's the crux of the matter. Vulnerability for many of us is just one step too far outside our comfort zone. For me to put my hands up and say, you know what, I'm drowning here, I can't cope, 7 years ago would have been unheard of, because I did not want anybody to know that, number one, I was struggling, number two, how it was affecting my health, and number three, that to be seen to be unable to cope on any level, because I'd created the illusion that I was Superwoman, these days I consider myself to be my own superhero, but for many, many different reasons.
And that's great. And you mentioned the 7 years ago. So in 2012, you had a big turning point in your life, and you changed from the person that you were into the, let's say, the version 2 of yourself. So I want you to share with our listeners how were you before that turning moment, and briefly what happened really.
Okay, oh my.
In a brief way.
A potted history in time. A child of the 60s. I was born in 1960, the elder of 4 siblings. I grew up in a typical Yorkshire working class background. Dad was a miner, subsequently an engineer. Mum worked part-time jobs. I had a traumatic childhood, often at the hands of my mum. But there's no malice there for me, because I now know as a grown-up that she knew what she knew, and that was it. She knew how to parent. That was her learned experience. And although it wasn't very pleasant and at times abusive, to be frank, what it did was trigger in me a lifelong journey along what I've come to call life's loneliest of roads, that of mental ill health. I became an angry teen, as most people do. My dad often called me a rebel without a cause, because he was, until very late on in the game, as it were, he was very unaware of the sort of things that had been happening in my life. So that angry teen left home as soon as she could. She met the fella she subsequently married when she was 17. We're still together today, some 30 odd years later, 40 odd years later. We've been married for, I've lost count. You don't get that for double murder, to be fair, but we're still together today. And you know, he's the love of my life. I could crown him at least 3 times a day, because we're human and we argue and we disagree and all that business. But in marrying him, at a point when I should and could have taken responsibility for all the choices I then came to make as an adult, I didn't. And I didn't because I was too rooted in the story that I'd come to believe, known and validate as my truth, which was at that time, my mother was the cause of everything. It was her fault I had mental ill health. When I got married and pressure, job, kids, house, mortgage, all that business, when all the pressures of that life started to weigh me down, I kicked into my childhood behavioural pattern, which was to people please. I didn't want anybody, I was that swan, I didn't want anybody to know I was struggling, so I would say yes when no would have been far more sensible. I'd completely forgotten that there was 24 hours in a day. Fast forward to the age of 52, that had unravelled to the degree that by the time I was 52, I'd had 4 nervous breakdowns, well documented. I was nearly 7 stone heavier than I am now. And I'm still the same height. I've only ever been 5'1" and a bit, but I was 7 stone heavier. So I was almost twice as wide. By the time I was 52, I was bright yellow, because at that time, on the day I went to my GP on the 26th of September 2012, for some routine blood tests, she took one look at my blood tests and admitted me to hospital. I was bright yellow. And as my mental health had declined, I'd fallen into what turned out to be near fatal alcoholism. And on the day of admission, I was halfway down, the morning of admission, I was halfway down my 2nd bottle of wine for the day, of my then 5 bottles of wine per day habit. The story I told myself for the preceding adult years, 26 years or so, was that I could cope, I can do this, I'm not like her, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, this is all her fault. My mental health is her fault, ill health is her fault, my drinking is my mental health's fault, so therefore that's her fault. I therefore don't have to take any responsibility for that. I can go and have another drink. And it nearly killed me. In recovery, very, very early on in my recovery, both physical and mental, let alone from the alcoholism, it suddenly hit me that actually the root cause of all my woes in my adult life hadn't been my mother at all. She'd been dead 14 years when I was admitted to hospital, and she was teetotal. She was many things, but she never once forced me to have a drink. She never once sort of contributed to any of the decisions I made in my adult life. And yet in my brain, I was still blaming her for everything I did. when I took responsibility really, really early on in my recovery, Aggie, when I took responsibility for not only the choices that I'd made from the age of, say, 18 or 19 until the day I was admitted to hospital when I was 52, the day I took responsibility for my choices, it suddenly struck me that I also had to take responsibility for the consequences of those choices. And very quickly after that, I realized that the root cause of my adult trauma, if you like, was the fact that I'd come to accept, known, validated, and owned my truth, which was actually not true. I'd created a false reality that fit where my brain was still, which was way back in the 60s as a traumatized child. And it started that process started the day I was admitted 7 years ago. I'll be 7 in September this year. And you know what? There's a saying, is there not, that every 7 years there's a new and improved you?
That's, yes.
My husband, I tell you, my husband's running well scared. He has no clue what's coming for the next 7 years. But neither do I, to be fair. So
it's only going to get even better.
Yeah, I hope so.
You said about taking responsibility for our choices and the consequences, which reminded me of, the cause and effect, which is a universal law that we tend to overlook. And many people, unfortunately, blame circumstances or other people or events for their own personal situation. And this is, it's only when you take responsibility for who
Absolutely.
you are and what you've done with your life, then you have a chance to actually change it, because it's up to you.
It's absolutely 110%. The choice is ours. As children, we have little choice up to a certain point, till we leave home and get a job and so on. And at that point, most people do, at least take responsibility for the choices, if not the consequences. But in not doing so, we fall prey to what I call the victim syndrome. The woe is me. Why is my life always like this? Why do things always turn out like that? Cause and effect. That is a perfect example. You cause things to happen to you by the vibrations that you put out in the world. It doesn't really matter if you believe in things like law of attraction or anything else. It's a simple fact. We are, as human beings, we are a bundle of energy in motion. That's what emotion stands for. Emotion, energy in motion. And it's a physical reaction to everything around us that causes a vibration. For people that maybe aren't aware, a vibration on a sad day will be, our vibration drops. On a really good upbeat day, I'm up for this and I'm happy and I'm excited today, so I'm quite bouncy. Yes. So if we were a radio tuner, we'd be going up and down. My week's been like that already this week, and it's only Wednesday. But a hashtag only human after all, and I accept that today. 7 years ago, I wouldn't have done. The various odds and sods this week that have thrown me a curveball would have been enough to send me running for a bottle. And these days, I understand that as can any of us, when they have the skill set, I can take a chance to choose to change my mood, my mindset, my story, and my life at any single second. I forget who said it originally, but there's a saying that we can be defined by our circumstances, or we can be defined by how we react and overcome them. I fell into the first category for 52 years. And these days, I will hold my hand up and say, do you know what? I made a mistake. I've cocked up. This is not how it's meant to be. It shouldn't have happened like this. And that's quite an intimidating experience. And I think many people fail to get that far in terms of, they might say, yeah, I know I did that. I made that choice. That's fine. Well, is it? It's one step beyond to accept responsibility for everything. And it's a scary place to be. And that's where I come in when I help the professional swans, because I help them to reframe the way they see themselves, the choices they're making, and take responsibility for that first. It's the have, be, do scenario, isn't it? Do, be, have, and all that is same words, different order.
Yes.
We think if we have something, we have to have something, we need to do something, and then we'll be something. as we both know, it's the other way around. It's cliche, but be happy, you know, and then in doing whatever it is that makes you happy, you will have what you ultimately want. And that's a very simplistic analogy of what we both know to be a lot more complicated, but it works. And you know, things like vibrations and law of attraction were always sort of on the edges of my world, but I was too far down the rabbit hole to take advantage of any of it. And these days I take every day for what it is. Every day that I open my eyes, without sounding evangelical, is a blessing, in that, number one, I've opened my eyes, and number two, no matter what the day brings to me, good, bad, or indifferent, I'm just grateful to be here. And when your mindset's changed to that degree, your resilience increases, and you're far more able to cope with what the world throws at you.
I know exactly what you mean, so 100%. And there was something that you mentioned about, the stories that many people tell themselves.
Yeah.
The disempowering stories that really strip them of maybe self-esteem. And I wanted to ask you about, because you mentioned self-forgiveness and self-care, something very important for you. So with your experience with the people that you've been working with, what is it that people tend not to forgive about themselves? Or what is it that needs to click for something to change? Apart, from having an experience like yourself, which was, I suppose, when you go there, then you must change.
Absolutely. I mean, when I liken what happened to me the day that I was told, yes, I'd survived the battle, i.e. the admission to hospital, but it was almost not relevant because I was still going to die. That for me was what I came to call my paradigm shift. Mm-hmm. The day when my world switched on its axis and I suddenly saw everything with such clarity that I knew I'd never, ever think about anything the same again. Now, that sounds a bit dramatic, but Princess Diana's death, for instance, I mentioned this the other night when we were together, Princess Diana's death caused a massive paradigm shift for many men across the world because they suddenly realized that it was okay for men to cry. Mm-hmm. The levels of emotional intelligence in men have been noted to have increased on the back of that death, which is an unfortunate way for people to learn, but nevertheless, anything is possible. And it's the way we talk to ourselves is instrumental. But the way I help people to understand that they can do anything they want, they can be anything they want, they can achieve anything they want, is to dig deep and get right back to what they think is the root cause of all their woes, and then unpick it. I liken it to peeling back the layers of an onion. And when we get to the stinky green bit in the middle, and people are crying their eyes out, I know I've hit the jackpot, if you like. And it's oftentimes they don't understand that much like me, they don't understand that they've had their eye on a different ball. And in that clarity comes the dawning realization that shit, I need to forgive myself because I got it wrong. Nobody else. I thought it was this. It actually was that. But what we forget, or if we ever knew it in the first place, to be fair, if we make mistakes, or if we're scared of something, or if we're in a situation where forgiveness is deemed to be necessary from us to somebody else, for instance, there's one element that is always missing in any of those scenarios, and that is quite simply a piece of knowledge. Mm-hmm. Something is missing from the equation. Every event elicits either a reaction or response, which gives us the outcome. If we get an outcome that we don't like, then we need to maybe look at it again. How would the outcome have been different had I responded, not reacted, for instance? Have you ever seen the film Sliding Doors with Gwyneth Paltrow?
Yeah, yes, I have.
Life is a series of sliding doors. If I choose to react like this will happen. On the other hand, if I respond like that will happen. And it's a case of finding the strategies and the toolkits to help you just pause long enough to make a rational as opposed to an irrational choice in life. Forgiving ourselves is vital. If we don't forgive ourselves, number one, we don't have that power to forgive anybody else because it's not ours to give away. But the forgiveness element for me was twofold. Very early on in my process, I forgave my mother. The day that she told me she was dying, I'd actually written her a letter because I was going to confront her about what I perceived then, because at 39, as I was then, I was still very much down the rabbit hole of this is your fault. But I'd written her a letter because I knew she wouldn't listen to me. But she'd spent years opening my post, so I'd put it in a sealed envelope with a name on it, and I knew she'd read it, so I wasn't bothered. But before I could say anything, she told me she was dying, and she did. She didn't last very long at all. After that, bless her, she died from ovarian cancer, which was quite traumatic. However, I didn't confront her that day, and I am pleased and proud of myself that I knew in that moment that actually she had far bigger fish to fry than I did. Whatever gripes mine were, they were far, far too small to be even on her radar. And a large part of me, more than a large part of me, is glad that I didn't do that. What it triggered in me after her death was unresolved grief. It was grief for a mother's love that I'd never had. It was grief for never having resolved the situation, and so on and so on and so forth. And I blamed myself a lot then for not confronting her far earlier. And then I started to read people like Wayne Dyer and Maya Angelou, and I knew that actually this is bigger. And it took me a long time to understand that in the process of everything that ever happens to any of us, we forget that we are we're the only common denominator in every single situation that plays out in each of our lives. Every relationship, every job we've had and lost, every job we've loved and walked away from, all the money we spent that we didn't have, etc. We are the common denominator. And when I realized that my story, not my childhood story, my adult story, was what got me into trouble, I then started to look around every situation in my life, and it was all there were faults in every area, because all I'd been doing for 52 years was papering over the cracks. Mm-hmm. And I had, as a recovering addict, which I still consider myself to be, I've not had a drink of any description, or largely, and I've largely been prescription medication free, apart from one or two sort of hiccups, for 7 years. And I'm really proud of that fact, because I no longer need that emotional crutch. However, in the clarity that comes with sobriety, one of the first things any addict has to go through, whether they go through AA or any other program, is the process of forgiving, building bridges. And I defy anybody to be able to do that successfully with other people if they've not done the work here, because it's vital. We are our own best friend. We are the one that's inside our head when we wake up in the morning, when we go to sleep at night. We are the only one inside our heads. We're the only person who was here the day we were born, who will be here the day we die, unless we're very fortunate and die really young. And everything that happens to us in between, once we're out of childhood, is down to us. Lots of imprinting goes on in childhood. We form a worldview of ourselves by the time we're 6, 7, 8. Lots of imprinting happens. And yes, we may have to forgive our parents for that, or our carers in some level if we feel that need. But what we also need to know, and I go back to the piece about knowledge, the knowledge we had missing as a child when we formed the I hate my mother story, we didn't have the knowledge. I did not have the knowledge as a child that I had when I was 58, so sort of 6 years sober. And that knowledge was simply the fact that my mother had the exact same childhood with her mother, who incidentally was my best friend growing up, that I had with her. I didn't know what I didn't know. And I hated her for such a long time on the back of a childhood experience, which was quite traumatic, but I didn't know what I didn't know. So the process for me is vital, that when we are looking to apportion blame, if there's a forgiveness element to it, which if there's blame attached, there often is, before we start firing bullets at people or becoming hung up on what they did, always look within. These days I have a group, as you know, called Everything Begins and Ends with You. And the reason that it's called that is for that reason alone. Everything, without exception, begins and ends with us. And I forgave myself for not knowing that for 52 years. And it took a while, to be fair.
I liked what you said, that sometimes the only thing that stops us from changing is a missing piece of knowledge, which so let's keep learning until the knowledge just fits in place and moves, rotates the puzzle.
Yeah, I mean, people say to me all the time, the thing is, can't teach an old dog new tricks. I've been doing this all my life. It has to stay like this. That's just the way it is. Seth Godin said, we get what we settle for. We don't have to settle for what we get. And we can take that chance any second of any day to choose to change. That means taking a chance on us. My oldest client to date has been 68 years old. At 68 years old, she's 8 years older than I am. And she's now decided that she's going to live the life that was gifted to her to live, having grown up with chronic physical health issues and being loved and cared for and nurtured in such a way that she grew up knowing she couldn't climb trees, couldn't go for long walks, couldn't swim in the lake because of her condition. That lady at 68 is walking 5 miles a day, doing yoga every morning, has gone to singing lessons and has now learned to play the piano at 68 because she suddenly had that moment of clarity that actually, yes, she was happily married. Yes, her parents loved her and she loved them, but she stayed cosseted all her life. And she didn't dare step outside her comfort zone. And there was no abuse there. It was all well-meaning and cared for. And for a while we were working together, she railed against it. And she was like, oh my God, I've wasted my life and I should have done this and I should have done that. And I was like, okay. But to say you have wasted your life, that means that you are disrespecting is not too strong a word, I don't think, everything that's happened in your adult life. You're happily married for 40 odd years. You've got 2 grown children, 3 grandchildren. Would you change any of that? And of course, her answer was no.
Everything in our life leads us to the moment that we are right now. No matter how it has been, it has shaped you into the person you are, and you've had the experience that you have in the present moment.
Absolutely, but to tie in what I've just said about my client, for her, the forgiveness element in that, she came to me with a bit of a niggle about the fact that she'd not got long left. She could live to be 150, who knows? But she'd not got long left. She knew she'd got less time to come than she'd already had, which is a fact, unless she does live to be 150. But she'd got this sense of unrest, unease. And deep down, she sort of did blame her parents for loving her too much, which happens quite a lot. And then her clarity came in the fact that actually she had never once said to anybody, actually, do you know what? I am going to go for a walk today and see what happens. When I said to her, you've had 2 children naturally. Yes. Why can't you go for a walk? I personally don't know of anything that's more painful, more energetic, that expands so much energy than having children, and you've had 2 naturally. And she just looked at me as though I'd slapped her and went, I'm going for a walk when we've done. And she's not stopped since, bless her, because she'd not connected the dots. We buy into what we know, and if we're comfortable, we don't stick our head above the parapet of the comfort zone because we're scared it might get shot off, essentially. But what's the worst that could happen? We have to ask ourselves, in any situation, what's the best that could happen? What's the worst that could happen? Actually, what's most likely to happen? And unless the moon falls out of the sky tonight, we're all going to wake up tomorrow because gravity will still keep us on the planet, and we can try again.
Mm-hmm. There's something I wanted to ask you. You said earlier that you still consider yourself to be a recovering addict. Is that what you said?
Absolutely.
I wanted to ask, so is it something that how do you feel like you will always be feeling like that, or is there going to be a point that you say, no, I'm completely past that anymore? It just sounds, maybe it is not different, it is not the same, but for example, I have smoked for many years in my life, and I've quit years ago, but I don't consider myself to be like, a recovering ex-smoker or something like that.
No, but you are, the fact is you are an ex-smoker, yeah?
Yes, yes, as a fact, yes.
That's a fact.
Sure.
The label that you attach to yourself is your business. If it's not an issue in your life, if it's and so on. For me, I don't think about myself day in, day out as a recovering addict.
Okay.
The only time I ever check my sobriety days, so for instance, when I spoke in Chelmsford the other week, last week, I checked, and it would just happen to be that the following day was my 2,500 day soberversary, which is what I call them, my soberversary days. I'm like the Queen. I have 2 birthdays. My actual birthday is in April, and my soberversary is on the 26th of September. But that's because I choose to remind myself to be grateful.
Yes.
And every day, actually, I'm grateful for the fact that I'm still here. But on actual dates, I remind myself. I don't think about myself on a day-to-day basis as a recovering addict. I don't introduce myself. There's a cliche, isn't there? Hello, my name's Sue Curr. I'm a recovering alcoholic. Whoa, shock. I don't. No. But in my head, I know number one, that I will never, ever, ever have another drink, ever. I don't even eat food these days, knowingly, if it's been cooked in alcohol. I'm that, I have a very upset liver. I have a very cirrhotic liver that's not very happy with me at all. However, these days I look after myself so well that it actually, the bit of it that is still working, God bless it, it doesn't know it's poorly, because my mind is telling my liver every single day that I'm going to live to be 120. My blood function, my liver and kidney blood function tests for the last 4.5 years. So it took me nearly 3 years to get to a point of good physical health. My liver and kidney function tests for the last 4.5 years or so have been completely, utterly normal. And I'm pleased and proud to say that I'm actually, because I go twice a year. I go twice a year for body scans and blood tests and so on still, because when your liver's as cirrhotic as mine is, the next stage, sadly, is liver cancer.
Can I offer a different perspective? Because you mentioned earlier about the 7-year period. So it is said that one other thing that changes in 7 years is the body. So we have a different organ or a different part of our body is completely renewed after 7 years.
It is, except when your liver's cirrhotic. I've seen photographs of my liver. It looks like a very, very, very big, grumpy avocado. Thick, hard, liver's supposed to be shiny and red. Mine's not. I don't think it's green, but it's not very happy. But for me, that bit is dead. It can't go anywhere. It's just the bit that's cirrhotic is dead. It's scarred. It's dead. The bit that's in the middle is the bit that's still regenerating itself. And that is, and I'm happy with that, because, I say to anybody that listens these days, I'm going to be the first person with cirrhosis of the liver that's essentially is end stage, that's going to live to be 120. I'm stating that as a fact. We'll see.
Excellent.
But going back to the recovering alcoholic, it's nothing more than a label. And these days, the only time I ever use it is in interviews like this, if it comes up. But it's not something I actively promote.
I understand.
I do work with people who have addiction problems, but not as often as people might think. I work with people who have it problems. We all have an it. It might be drinking, it might be smoking, it could be gambling, it could be the fact that I can't get out of bed in the morning, it could be I had an abusive mother or a boyfriend that hates me. It doesn't matter. We've all got an it, but with our it, we have a story that we've built around it, and we've made it our truth, and we start to live that truth. Going back to law of attraction, cause and effect. When we live our truth for what we tell ourselves it is, that's exactly what we get.
Mm-hmm.
And personal development, in all honesty, for me, was one of the things that when it kicked in for real, and when I say for real, Tony Robbins' Awaken the Giant Within was the first personal development book I ever bought on its first print run. I've still got that copy somewhere, but I didn't do anything with it on it, thumb the pages, because I wasn't ready. The last 7 years, I'm like, I call my car my mobile university. I have podcasts on, I listen to Audible, and, and I just absorb, because personal development for anybody who wants to get from where they are to where they say they need to be or want to be, you can't essentially do it with the tools that you have. Otherwise, you'd be there already. So it's just a case of finding ways, building your own toolkit. And for me, things like Audible are a massive part of that toolkit. But the recovering alcoholic bit is a label. We don't actually need labels. None of us, I don't think.
No, I understand, Sue, and you covered me very well with what you answered. It was just a curious.
No, and I'm happy I'm happy that you asked me, because it's, it is. Although I must just tell you, for instance, I was at a networking meeting maybe about 4 months ago, and if you've done networking, you go around the room, people have their passion pitch or the elevator pitch or whatever they call it. And about three guys before I was due to stand up stood up and said, "Hi, my name's Paul. I'm a recovering alcoholic." And I thought, oh, okay. And then he went, "Ha, that's just a joke," and laughed. And everybody laughed because people had been standing up before him saying, "Hi, my name's," and I am. And he was being funny, he was making a joke, which made me laugh a lot, because I knew when I stood up, I knew exactly what I was going to say. And I've never said it before in a networking meeting or again, and I never will. But I stood up and I said, "Hi, my name's Sue, and unlike our friend Paul over there, I am actually a recovering alcoholic. If anybody wants to talk to me about that later, I'll see you outside." The room just went silent. This room full of businessmen didn't know where, and the guy that had said it was mortified. We had a conversation afterwards. I said, "Look, pal, I don't have an issue with it. I just thought it was funny, but because I use humor a lot, I couldn't not."
So can you, I'll change the direction a bit. Can you take us through your, I was reading about your coaching program, something that you help people with. And I liked the fearless, the acronym that you have there. So can you please explain that for our listeners that
Sure. I mean, essentially fearless, my business name is Fear Less and Live More, and that came about because up to the point of being 52, I'd feared a whole lot more and lived a whole lot less, so that it became a natural analogy for me. When I decided to sort of go into coaching, and I needed a name, I needed a signature name for the program, and I settled on Fearless, which is all in capitals, F.E.A, etc. And for me, it's formed of eight pieces, essentially. Not everybody needs every piece, and everything I do is bespoke. We sort of tweak it and make it fit. But so, for instance, it would be F would be forgive. Empower would be the E, acceptance, resilience, let it go, embrace yourself, and then step up to success. And like I say, the people that I work with, not everybody needs to go through all the elements, but every situation they're in has a tiny bit of each element in it, tiniest bit. So it becomes quite organic. And I largely work with people online. If geographically I can get to them, if they're close by, then we'll do face-to-face. If geographically they live in Australia and they want to pay me to go there, hellfire, yeah, I'll just get my visa. That's not a problem. But largely I work via Zoom like this because it's becoming increasingly popular. It doesn't eat as much into people's time, and people who are a bit fragile also have the safety button of saying, right, this meeting's done, boom, and they can cut me off. It's not happened yet, touch wood, but yeah, so the way that works is we work for a set period of time, and that's determined by client because of their schedules, etc., but it's designed to run no more than 12 weeks. Somebody said to me, well, my friend in America has a shrink she's been going to for 5 years. And I said that she's got too much money. If you're still going to a shrink after 5 years, there's something not right there. Something's not happening and you're not being challenged. But the part of the process for me with Fearless, for instance, is I say to people all the time, if you choose to work with me on this program, it will be your program. It will be a partnership of one of empowerment and accountability. But it will also be a case of me saying a lot of, is that true? Is that true? Byron Katie uses it a lot. A very good friend of mine introduced Byron Katie to me, and I use that a lot now. If it's good enough for her, it's good enough for me, to be fair. But I say to people all the time, I will only ask you, is that true, so many times, because I will know if you are lying to yourself. And the key word there is yourself. I promise people that I will never, ever lecture, patronize, put them down, demean them in any way, nor will I disrespect their feelings or their thoughts. And I will certainly never, ever lecture them or preach to them. But if I catch them lying to themselves, I will kick their ass. Because it's that, not whatever they've come to me with, what they think is their problem, that's their root problem. And when we get to that point, people very quickly learn how to fly, which is why I'm confident that by the end of 12 weeks, if we get that far, then yeah, people do come back. Can I just have a quick chat? Can I just, and that's fine, because we all need to realign and refocus, you know. But I think it's vital in this business. I'm very unusual with a lot of my coaching amongst the coaching fraternity, and some coaching friends of mine think I'm stark staring mad, because I never take anybody on as a client until we've had a conversation such as this. And that could be 20 minutes, it could be up to an hour. But for me, it's all about being authentic, and it's all about whoever wants to work with me being comfortable with the fact that I do occasionally swear, and I am prepared to kick their ass if they lie to themselves. And what they see is what they get, essentially. And being fearless for the purpose of clarity. And I think you know what I'm going to say now. Being fearless. If you're scared of spiders, no, that's not my baby. But if you are living a fearless life, for me, the definition of that would quite simply be having the courage to be who you really are, living your life in your way, on your terms, without ever feeling the need to apologize, excuse, justify, or explain yourself unless you choose to. And moreover, not giving a rat's ass what anybody else thinks.
That's perfect. So this is something that I was making notes of it. This is so good.
Thank you.
I have a couple of quick fire questions just to...
Okay.
If you could go back in time and meet your 20-year-old self and had maybe a couple of hours to tell her something, what would that be?
Oh, wow. I actually wrote a piece on this a while ago. I'm happy to send it to you, actually, because I'm
absolutely do. Yes,
I'm paraphrasing here, and I actually entitled it the lessons, the things that I wish my dad had told me, because I didn't want to sound so far at my own backside, to be fair. But essentially they were the things that I would have told myself, and they are. And again, I'm paraphrasing massively, but be kind to everybody you meet, including yourself. You're the first person you meet in the morning. Be kind. You know, if it comes down to being kind or right, be kind and you'll be right anyway. You know, you'll meet we all will meet many different people in this life. You know, rich men, poor men, beggar men, sadly thieves. Forgive them and yourself for what they don't know. You know, don't ever look down on anybody, including yourself, unless it's to pick yourself up and give somebody a helping hand. And remember that everybody, without exception of their status, creed, culture, colour, everybody is fighting a battle that none of us know anything about, I should say. And just understand that regardless of what anybody else says, it's a cliche, but whoever and whatever any of us are, we're enough. We might not be everybody's cup of tea, but that doesn't mean that we're not enough. If you feel that something's right for you, do it.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
And let's say you had a magic wand and you could instantly change something in the world as it is today. One thing. What would that be?
That's dead easy, because my 8-year-old, actually she was 6 when she asked me this, Megan, asked me 2 years ago, Nonny, if you could wave a magic wand, what would you make change in the world? And my answer to her was quite simply, if I had a magic wand, Meg, I would wave it really hard and make sure that every single government in this world made it compulsory for our educational establishments to teach meditation, mindfulness, growth mindset, emotional intelligence. Because if that happened, within one generation, the face of this world would change for the better forever.
I agree. And the way the traditional education is broken in that way.
It absolutely.
That's why people have to turn into self-education, and podcasts like this, anything that has to do with self-education, personal development is what we're not being taught in school. No one taught us about emotional intelligence or how to be kind to ourselves.
No.
But these are the elements for a fulfilling life. It's not knowing trigonometry. That is a technical task.
If you need to know things like trigonometry, the time to learn that is when you're going into the industry that requires it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we need to concentrate on us. As you well know, one of my hashtags is self-care is sanity, not vanity. Learning to look after ourselves is vital. If we don't teach ourselves to look after ourselves, how are we going to empower our children to do the same? And I'm very fortunate that one of the things I do actually is go into schools and deliver programs like this to sort of primary school kids and when I was working in education to sort of secondary school kids, and they get it. All children learn to the best of their ability. All children have a potential that they can fulfill. It's not the same as everybody else's, but they each have an individual potential they can fulfill. And our educational system in this country particularly, you're right, it's broken. It doesn't teach them the skills that they need to survive, which is evidence in young people's mental health, sadly.
Yeah. So this it's a fascinating conversation.
Thank you.
Can you share how can people connect with you, how they can find out more? And
sure, yeah. I mean, my website is dead easy. Sue Curr, SUECURR, SueCurr.com. You can email me at SueCurr@SueCurr.com. My son said to me the other day, "Mother, that's the worst email address ever." To which my answer was, "Yeah, but it's the only one your father can remember." So SueCurr@SueCurr.com. If you go to my website, there are loads of Let's Talk, Empower Me buttons all over the place. You can find me on Facebook. I have a page, Feel Less, Live More. Add me as a friend. I like to speak to most people. I'm happy to be connected to anybody who's like-minded in terms of the things that we've spoken about. And I have a closed group for people who need a little bit more support called Everything Begins and Ends With You. And my phone number's on the website as well, but I will tell you I have call screen on. So I am very careful I pick the phone up too. But yeah, I can send you all the links and everything. That's no problem.
Sure. Excellent. That's great. Thank you so much for
having me.
For your time today and for sharing these really empowering messages. So I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure that the people that listen to this will find lots of value. So
Bless you.
Thanks again, Sue. Thank you very much.
Absolute pleasure, Aggie. Thank you very much.